alleviate all these conflicts, these geopolitical conflicts?
Well, in this area, the first few things I would do, we've already talked about. One is I would make it absolutely clear that free speech just wins, right? So whenever you got into a Charlie Hebdo situation or the Danish cartoons, the riots over those cartoons, we've had half a dozen situations like that in the last 10 years. The people, even our own government can't, we're fighting a war on terror, and we still can't defend free speech when those situations erupt. So, for instance, this was over the Innocence of Muslims film. I don't know if you remember that film. It was like a YouTube film that kicked off riots everywhere. And
Well, was that true, though? Because I've heard so many versions.
No, it did. Well, I mean, the Benghazi thing was, it's true that it did kick off riots everywhere, but the thing that was egregious about our government statement there was that we basically just, rather than to take the totally sane line of saying, listen, in our society we're committed to freedom of speech, and you can make films about anything here, and that never gives you license to kill people, right? Or to burn embassies, full stop.
What was the name of the documentary again?
Well, it was a film called The Innocence of Muslims, or Innocence of Muslims, made by some crackpot somewhere, and it was just a YouTube video, but it got spun as this major scandal in the Muslim world, and it reliably produced this reaction of the sort that the Danish cartoons had, and we, rather than just hold the line for free speech, the State Department said something like, we totally repudiate this attack upon Islam, and we just distanced ourselves from it just as a way of trying to contain the madness, right? I mean, it was a symptom of just how afraid we are that this sort of thing can get out of hand in the Muslim world, because it can, right? If there's a rumor that a Quran got burned, or if some pastor in Florida threatens to burn a Quran, reliably people by the dozens get killed in places like Afghanistan, because they're just it's in a way that a suicide bombing between Sunni and Shia never produces a response of that sort. So it's I would hold to free speech, and I would just make that, because free speech is the freedom that safeguards every other freedom. I mean, if you can't speak freely, if you can't criticize powerful people or powerfully bad ideas, there's just no way to defend society from slipping back into theocracy or any other kind of medieval situation. And so you have to defend free speech, even speech you don't like. So like these Holocaust denial laws in Western Europe. It's illegal to deny the Holocaust in Germany and a few other countries. I think Austria. I think even France, and it's a ludicrous law. You should be totally free to deny the Holocaust, and then everyone else should be free to treat you like an idiot, and you should be free to destroy your reputation, right? The fact that we're putting people in, or that they are putting people in jail for denying the Holocaust is totally counterproductive, and it does look like, in defense of Muslim apologists, it does look like a double standard. You're going to put people in jail for denying the Holocaust, but you're going to allow Charlie Hebdo to criticize the Prophet? How does that make sense, right? I totally agree with them there. We should not be criminalizing any form of speech. So
regardless of how stupid.
Yeah, and but there are people trying to push through blasphemy laws. There's a politician in the UK who recently just said he would make Islamophobia a criminal offense, right? he would. I'm sure he would make the sorts of things I say about Islam criminally actionable in the UK. Right? This is a disaster. That's the wrong road to go down. So first thing, and I think that's a hugely important thing. And the other piece we just talked about is just getting off of oil. I mean, just imagine that one change, right? We could get off of oil. And that would prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that spending your life splitting hairs about Muslim theology and demonizing the rest of the world and exporting, crazy madrasas by the tens of thousands all over the world, as the Saudis do, it would prove that that is not a way to join the community of functional nations, because absent an ability to pull their wealth out of the ground, they have no intellectual content. They don't produce anything of value that anyone wants. That's a problem they would have to solve, right, if they don't want to be beggared in a global community.
Well, isn't that an issue also with the ideology of the religion, is that you're not allowed to question or change or manipulate the way you approach life because it's all dictated by the religion, even the finances.
Well, it's part of it, and just when you look at societies where they keep half the population, the female half, more or less hostage and unable to get educated or to work or to drive cars, or depending on which society you're talking about. This economically and socially doesn't make any sense if in a context where you need to produce intellectual content to be part of the global conversation.
So the only way they've been able to do this is because of the fact that they have an extreme amount of money that comes from oil.
Well, certainly if you're talking about the oil states, yeah. And so that's, if oil were no longer valuable, and we actually could get to a time where that would be the case, where oil is just dirty, a dirty fluid that no one wants to have anything to do with, right? That would be a huge change. Now, I'm sure there's another side to this argument where it would be a destabilizing change. I mean, just imagine how things will start to run off the rails in the Middle East if oil is worthless, right? And what's Saudi Arabia going to be like? I mean, arguably, I think they've probably hedged their bets, and they have so much money in other investments now that at least the royal family would be fine. But it's a huge part of the problem, and as you pointed out, it keeps us double dealing and being captive to the cycle of defending our very real economic interests. I mean, really like existential interests in terms of our energy supply over the years, and producing mayhem as a result.
But how do you get someone to abandon such a rigid ideology? How do you get someone to open their mind up to the possibility that this was just written by people? There's just a way of governing people and keeping people in line, which is essentially every single religion that's ever been created.
Well, but see, it happens. And actually, this is another point that Abby Martin made, which I agree with. She doesn't. We don't agree with it we don't think this thought for the same reasons. But she pointed out that religions change, right? That you roll back the clock 500 or so years, Christians were burning people alive and actively prosecuting people for blasphemy. You had the Inquisition in Europe, and that was every bit as much of a horror show as what's going on in Iraq now. So look, Christianity can be just as bad as Islam. Now, it's true, as a matter of history, that is in fact true. There are differences between Islam and Christianity that are nevertheless important, but the crucial piece is that Christianity did not change from the inside. Christianity got hammered from the outside by a Renaissance and, a Reformation initially, which was bloody and horrible, but it got hammered by the forces of a scientific revolution and an attendant industrial revolution and capitalism and the rest of culture that didn't want to be shackled to theocracy for very good reason, right? And so, like, once you have a real science of medicine, you don't have to ask the priest why your child is flopping around on the floor. And when the priest diagnoses it as demonic possession, you don't take it seriously, right? You now have a neurologist to talk to. I mean, there's progress made outside of religion, which propagates back to religion and applies a lot of pressure to it. So Christianity has been humbled and mastered by the secular world, by humanism, by science, by the rest of our conversation with ourselves. And this has not happened in the Muslim world, and it should happen. It has to happen. We have to figure out how to engineer it for Muslims, and it's not going to come from the outside. Non-Muslims are not going to force it on Muslims, but we have to support the genuine reformers and the people who are fighting for the rights of women and gays and free thinkers in the Muslim world. And the horrible thing is that the liberals on our side don't do that. The liberals on our side criticize people like me and even Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a former Muslim who's being hunted by theocrats, right? They criticize her as a bigot for how unsparing her criticism is of Islam, whereas she is fighting for the rights of women to be equal in the Muslim world, right? And so our liberalism has just truly lost the plot here, and we have to be committed to the same kind. I mean, we are concerned about the rights of women in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, that's how effete our concerns are now. Like, why isn't there an equal number of women in venture capital now? What a fucking scandal, right? There are people who can go on for hours about that, right? I'm not saying it's not a potential scandal. Great, let's talk about that scandal. But let's talk about the fact that, girls 6 years of age are getting clitorectomies by barbarians in septic conditions, and everyone around them thinks it's a good and necessary thing, right? And women who get raped get killed because they brought dishonor on their family. I mean, there's another planet over there that we have to interact with, because its violence is coming our way, if for no other reason. But there's another reason. There's the ethical imperative of figuring out how to help people who are hostage to a bad system, and so yeah, let's be for women's rights globally. But what does that look like? That looks like a rather staunch criticism of the way women are treated under Islam.
There's a lot of seemingly open-minded European cultures that have opened the door for a lot of Islamic immigrants or Muslim immigrants to come over to their country. Now they're dealing with a lot of the issues that involve these ideologies being a part of their culture now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they are in a situation similar to ours with Latin America, where they need immigrant labor, right? They're actually worse than the U.S. in terms of their replacement rate. You've got a bunch of countries in Western Europe who are becoming these senescent populations. They're just not replacing themselves, and they need immigrant labor. And the most of the available labor is coming from the Muslim world. And then you also have the problem of political refugees who are leaving war-torn places for obvious reasons and winding up in the closest shores, across the Mediterranean. And so yeah, the people they're attracting are different from many of the Muslim immigrants we get in the U.S. who are coming to work for Google, or they get engineering degrees, or it's a different demographic largely.
Okay, I think we've covered that subject. Into the
Well, before we dive into that, I'm looking at a list of topics that were brought up by our Twitter people, and I'll read the list just so we have it in our heads, and you can decide what you want to deal with here. But Islam, anything but Islam, Abby Martin. So I think we have to deal with Abby Martin.
Okay, Abby, who is a good friend. I love Abby. She's crazy though, in a good way, but she's wild. And she accused you of being one of the new atheists with your anti-Islamic rhetoric. And, that's nothing new to you. You've been accused of that in the past. Yeah. Did she misrepresent your point of view? Like, did you listen to it?
Yeah, I did. I did listen to it. And
should we play it or no?
I don't think you need to. Well, you don't need to. But,
what did she say, and what do you not agree with what she said?
Well, she said it was really interesting listening to her because I listened to the whole podcast, and she didn't mention me until like the second hour. And I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, I'm actually having a conversation with you in my head as I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, man, Joe, it's kind of remarkable what you are able to do here, because you're having a conversation with her. From my point of view, you were just drinking from a fire hose of bullshit, right? It's just like what she's saying, there's so much wrong with what she's saying. But yet you're in a position to have a conversation with her that is where there's just like a ton of goodwill, and it doesn't run to the ditch at all. And you can have a conversation with me in the same vein. But then I was thinking, I could not. I mean, I'm sure she's a perfectly nice person, and I would be very nice talking to her. But I have a feeling now of more or less total hopelessness talking to someone as polarized on these issues as I view her to be. And so I was kind of praising you in my mind, thinking, I couldn't do what you're doing here. And at that instance, she just mentioned me, right? So it was like one of those bad scenes in a movie where the television starts talking to the character. She just kind of called me out and then more or less totally misrepresented my views. So she said many things that are just inaccurate, which we can talk about. But in terms of what she attributes to me, she said that I only care about intentions, right? So that all intentions are all that matters. So if we kill 1 billion people, but meant well, we're fine. And if the Muslims kill 1 million people, but don't mean well, they're far worse than we are ethically. And intentions are all that matter. And she was, I think in her defense, I mean, I'm sure she's never read anything I've written, but she was reacting to a snippet of a podcast where I push back against some of the things that Noam Chomsky has said. And I haven't thought that I said in my first book that Chomsky doesn't value the ethical role of intentions enough, and I said something very brief in a podcast that bounced around, and so that's what she heard. So she misconstrued me there. Intentions are not all that matters, obviously, but intentions do matter. So if someone stabs you, right, the difference between them doing it on purpose because they want to kill you and them doing it by accident because they were cutting, you guys were cooking in the kitchen and they didn't know you were there, they turned and they stuck a knife into your belly. It's a world of difference ethically, right? So and the crucial difference is